The week had been long. Emily Turner pressed her forehead lightly against the cool glass of her apartment window, watching the last hints of daylight fade across the suburban street she had lived on for nearly 10 years. It was early spring in Seattle, the kind of evening where the air smelled faintly of rain, and the sky was painted in shades of gold and lavender. She sighed, feeling the weight of the silence around her. Fridays were supposed to feel like freedom. At least that's what she always told herself, but lately, they just felt like reminders of the life she no longer had. Once upon a time, she would rush home on a Friday, change into something pretty, and wait for her husband to suggest dinner out or a late-night movie. Those days were gone. Divorce had stolen that rhythm from her life, leaving behind a quiet emptiness she hadn't quite learned to fill. She set her work bag down by the couch, kicked off her shoes, and pulled her sweater tighter around herself. The apartment was neat, maybe too neat. Everything in its place, everything arranged to keep her hands busy so her mind wouldn't wander. Yet tonight, even the candles on her kitchen counter and the books on her shelf seemed to remind her of how much she longed for something more, something alive, something warm. Her phone buzzed. A message from a coworker. "Happy Friday. Don't forget the meeting Monday morning." She didn't reply. She couldn't bring herself to fake cheerfulness anymore. Not when the loneliness pressed in so sharply. She was halfway to pouring herself a glass of wine when it happened. A knock. Soft, gentle, almost hesitant. Emily froze, glass still in hand. At this hour, she wasn't expecting anyone. Most people texted before showing up. Her mind raced through possibilities: delivery, a neighbor needing help, or maybe someone at the wrong door. But when she opened it, her world shifted, if only a little. Daniel Cooper stood there. Her heart gave a sudden, unsteady jolt. Daniel wasn't a stranger, far from it. He lived just a few houses down the street. A quiet man in his 30s who had always been helpful, dependable. The kind of neighbor who shoveled snow from her driveway in the winter without being asked, who carried her heavy grocery bags when her arms were full, who waved whenever their paths crossed, but never lingered long enough to intrude. Tonight, though, was different. In his hands was a bouquet of fresh white lily. Their petals glowed softly against the fading light, almost too beautiful for an ordinary evening. Emily blinked at them, then at him, her thoughts scrambling to understand. "Daniel?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. What's this?" He shifted his weight slightly, as though nervous. His brown hair was a little messy. His jacket still zipped as if he hadn't planned to stay long. But his smile, gentle, careful, was what made her chest tighten. "I thought you might need these," he said softly, holding the flowers out. Emily hesitated, staring at them. Lily. Her favorite. She loved their purity, their elegance, the way they filled a room with fragrance. But how could he know that? She didn't remember telling him. Her fingers trembled as she reached out, brushing his hand as she took them. That tiny touch sent an unexpected warmth through her, one she wasn't ready for. "They're beautiful," she whispered, her voice catching. Daniel's eyes flickered to hers for just a moment, and in that glance, Emily saw something she had never noticed before, something tender, something careful, something that had probably been there all along, but hidden in silence. The moment felt suspended, like the world had paused just to let them stand there at her doorway. Two neighbors, on the edge of something neither had planned for. And then, the sound of another door opening broke the spell. Emily turned her head slightly to see Mrs. Collins, her next-door neighbor, stepping onto her porch. Mrs. Collins was in her 60s, silver hair neatly pinned, wearing her usual cardigan despite the mild evening air. She was the kind of woman who noticed everything, every delivery truck, every strange car, every shift in routine. Emily felt heat rise to her cheeks. She suddenly realized how this must look her standing there in her doorway, holding a bouquet. From a man, their hands still almost touching. Mrs. Collins's eyes flicked from Emily to Daniel, then down to the flowers. A small, knowing smile curved her lips, and then, with a voice just loud enough to carry across the quiet street, she said words that made Emily's breath catch. So he finally found the courage. The sentence hung in the air, heavier than the bouquet Emily clutched. Daniel's shoulders stiffened. Emily's heart stumbled in her chest. Courage? She echoed faintly, not sure if she was asking Mrs. Collins or herself. The older woman leaned against her porch railing, her gaze amused but not unkind. That man has been walking past my roses for years, rehearsing what he'd say to you. I thought he'd never do it. Emily's lips parted, but no words came out. She turned her wide eyes back to Daniel. His face was flushed, his jaw tight, his gaze fixed on the ground, as though wishing it would swallow him whole. And in that moment, holding flowers she hadn't expected, listening to a neighbor reveal a truth she hadn't known, Emily felt her world tilt. All the loneliness she had carried, all the quiet evenings and broken pieces of her heart, collided with the startling realization that maybe, just maybe, someone had been watching her from afar, caring quietly, carrying feelings he never dared to speak. She stood frozen on her doorstep, Lily pressed to her chest, her heart thundering so loud she could barely hear the rest of the evening. Sounds. Daniel finally looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for the first time, she saw him not as just a kind neighbor but as a man holding something fragile and powerful inside. And before she could gather her thoughts, Mrs. Collins gave a satisfied nod, as if confirming something unspoken, and disappeared back into her house, leaving behind a silence more charged than before. Emily swallowed, her throat tight. "Daniel, is that true?" she whispered, but his answer didn't come. Not yet, because the knock on the door had opened more than an evening. It had opened the door to secrets, to possibilities, to a story Emily wasn't sure she was ready to hear. And as the twilight deepened around them, she realized her life was no longer as quiet as it had been an hour ago. Something had shifted. Something had begun. Something that would change everything. The night had grown darker, though Emily hadn't noticed at first. Her apartment was lit by the soft glow of a single lamp near the couch, casting long shadows across the walls. The vase of lilies sat proudly on the table, their fragrance sweet, delicate, almost too perfect for the tension that filled the room. Emily's heart was racing, her breath uneven, her mind replaying the neighbor's words like a broken record. I hope he tells her the truth soon. She deserves to know before it's too late. Those words had slipped through the quiet evening like a knife, cutting through Emily's fragile moment of warmth with Daniel. Until then, her emotions had been a gentle storm: confusion, longing, fear, hope. But now, the storm was fierce, turbulent, threatening to tear through the calm she was just beginning to accept. She turned toward Daniel. His face was pale, his jaw tense, and his eyes carried something heavy, something he had clearly been hiding for a long time. Emily's fingers tightened on the vase, her knuckles white, as if holding on to something solid would keep her from falling apart. "Daniel." Her voice came out softer than she intended, but it trembled with urgency. What truth is she talking about? Daniel exhaled slowly, lowering his gaze to the floor. His hands flexed restlessly at his sides, betraying the calm expression he tried to wear. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating, until Emily thought she couldn't bear it any longer. When he finally spoke, His voice was raw, unlike anything she had heard from him before. "There's something I should have told you a long time ago," he said. His tone weighted with regret. "But every time I tried, I stopped myself, because I was terrified of losing even the little bit of closeness we had." Emily swallowed hard, her throat dry. "Daniel, what is it? Just tell me." He looked up then, his eyes searching hers, as if begging her to prepare herself. His voice broke slightly when he spoke again. "If I tell you, Emily, you may never look at me the same way again." The shift in the room, the words hung in the air like smoke. Emily felt her chest tighten, her pulse quickening. She had been through heartbreak before. She had been lied to before, but this felt different. It wasn't just about betrayal. It felt bigger. Her first thought was that maybe he was hiding another relationship. Maybe there was someone else. Or maybe he wasn't who she thought he was at all. She shook her head, forcing her voice steady. "Daniel, I can't stand this suspense. You've carried it for too long already. If you respect me at all, please just say it." He ran a hand over his face, sighing deeply. For a moment, it looked as though he might finally confess, but instead, he turned toward the window, the very same one through which Mrs. Collins's words had floated moments earlier. His reflection in the glass looked weary, almost haunted. "Emily," he whispered, his back still half turned. "Do you remember the night 3 years ago, when everything in your life seemed to fall apart? When you lost your job, and your father passed away?" The question startled her. How could she forget? That period had been the darkest chapter of her life. She had felt utterly alone, sitting in that very apartment night after night, fighting against despair. "I remember," she said softly, her voice breaking at the memory. Daniel turned then, his eyes glistening. "That night, you weren't as alone as you thought." The revelation in pieces. Emily blinked, confusion washing over her. "What do you mean?" Daniel took a hesitant step closer, his voice trembling. "You thought no one was there for you, that the world had abandoned you. But I was there. Every night I was outside your building, watching from across the street, waiting, hoping you would let me in." Emily's eyes widened, her breath caught in her throat. You were there." "Yes," he admitted, his hands clenching into fists as though forcing himself to keep speaking. "I was too much of a coward to knock on your door, but I couldn't bear the thought of you crying yourself to sleep. So I stayed close. Sometimes, until dawn. I just needed to know you were safe." Her heart pounded painfully. A mix of emotions swirled inside her: shock, disbelief, confusion, and an odd flutter of something warmer. He had been there, silently, quietly, when she thought no one cared. But before she could process it, another thought stabbed her. "Why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. Daniel closed his eyes briefly, as if the question cut too deep. "Because I didn't want to frighten you. I didn't want you to think I was strange or obsessive. I just wanted to protect you in the only way I knew how." And then, as time passed, it became harder and harder to explain without sounding like a fool. So I kept it buried. Emily's chest rose and fell quickly. His words felt both comforting and unsettling. Part of her wanted to cry at the thought of his silent devotion, but another part of her trembled with unease at the intensity of it. She stepped back slightly, clutching the edge of the table for balance. "Daniel, do you hear how that sounds? You were watching me every night." His expression crumpled, pained. "Not watching to invade your life, watching to make sure you were okay. There's a difference. But yes, I know how it sounds. And that's why I was so afraid to tell you." The emotional crossroads silence filled the room once more. The hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of a car passing by outside, the faint rustle of the lily in their vase, all of it pressed against Emily's senses as she tried to make sense of what he had confessed. Her heart felt torn in two directions. On one side was the fear, the thought that maybe he had crossed lines she never invited him to cross. On the other was the ache of realizing that, in her loneliest nights, someone had cared so deeply that he sacrificed his own comfort just to watch over her. She sank onto the couch, her hands trembling. Daniel, I don't know what to say. He moved closer, but slowly, carefully, as though approaching a frightened bird. Say what you feel, Emily. I'll accept it, whatever it is. Her lips parted, but no words came at first. Instead, tears pooled in her eyes, blurring her vision. I feel torn, because part of me wants to run from what you just said. But another part of me, she paused, swallowing hard. Another part of me wants to thank you, because maybe, just maybe, I wouldn't have made it through those nights if I'd truly been alone. Daniel's eyes softened, his own tears threatening. You were never alone. Not then, not now, not ever. I just wish I had found the courage to tell you sooner. Mrs. Collins returns before either of them could say another word. There was a sudden knock at the door. Emily startled, wiping her tears quickly. She opened the door to find Mrs. Collins again, her sharp eyes glancing between the two of them. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said, her tone softer than usual. But I thought you should know, Emily. That man has done more for you than you'll ever realize. I've seen him out there in the freezing cold, sitting in his truck for hours, just to make sure you were okay. And though I shouldn't meddle, I'll tell you this. Not many men in this world love like that anymore. Emily's throat tightened, and she turned to Daniel, who looked at the ground, ashamed yet silently pleading for understanding. Mrs. Collins gave a small smile and added, Don't let fear blind you to the kind of love people pray for their whole lives. Then she slipped back into her home, leaving behind a silence heavier than before. The moment of truth, Emily stood frozen by the door, her hand still resting on the knob. She couldn't ignore the neighbor's words. They sank into her like seeds, taking root in soil she didn't know was waiting. She turned slowly, facing Daniel once again. Is it true? All of it? His voice cracked as he nodded. Yes, every word. Her breath shuddered. She didn't know if she should run, cry, or throw her arms around him. But before she could choose, he stepped forward, his voice breaking. No, it was wrong to hide it. I know I should have told you years ago. But Emily, please believe me when I say this. Everything I've done because I love you. Not in a fleeting way. Not in a passing crush. I love you in a way that makes me willing to wait forever if I have to. Even if you never love me back. The tears she had been holding back spilled freely now. His confession was overwhelming, frightening, yet heartbreakingly sincere. And in that moment, Emily realized her world was no longer the same. She had to decide, was Daniel's love the kind she had longed for, or was it too much to bear? Her answer trembled on her lips. But, before she could speak it, Daniel whispered almost to himself, I'm afraid it may already be too late. The lily filled Emily's apartment with a soft fragrance, their white petals almost glowing in the warm light of the living room lamp. She had placed them in her tallest vase on the kitchen counter, her hands trembling slightly as she arranged them, but her mind wasn't on the flowers. It was on the man standing a few feet away from her, shifting nervously, his eyes fixed on the floor one moment, and on her the next. Daniel, her neighbor, her friend, the man who had just been exposed by Mrs. Collins, the man who now carried secrets heavy enough to shake the quiet rhythm of her life. Emily leaned against the counter, crossing her arms protectively over her chest. She needed space, but the small apartment offered none. Everywhere she looked, she saw reminders of her solitude. The neatly folded throw on the couch, the wine glass half filled on the table, the single chair at the small dining table. Everything screamed alone, and now, for the first time in years, she wasn't alone. She should have felt comfort in that, but instead she felt unsettled. "Emily," Daniel finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was steady, but there was a fragility in it, like a man trying to hold back an avalanche. "I know this is a lot. I didn't mean for it to come out like this. I wanted to choose the right moment, the right words. But maybe there's never a perfect time." She lifted her chin slightly, meeting his gaze. His eyes, brown, warm, but filled with something deeper, searched hers for permission to continue. "Go on," she said quietly. He took a breath, his chest rising and falling like he was gathering all his courage. "I've loved you for years, Emily." The words, simple as they were, landed like a stone dropped in a still pond, sending ripples across her heart. Emily's throat tightened. She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Daniel's voice lowered, almost as if confessing to himself, as much as to her. "I never told you because I didn't think I had the right. You were married when I first met you. And then, after you went through everything with him, I didn't want to add to your pain. You'd been hurt enough. You needed space, not someone pressing feelings onto you." Emily blinked rapidly, her heart pounding. The mention of her past marriage brought back flashes she didn't want, shouts echoing in her old house. Slammed doors, the hollow ache of betrayal. She pushed the memories down, but they clawed at her edges. "Daniel, Her voice cracked and she had to look away. "I've built walls for a reason. I don't know if I'm ready for this." He nodded, almost as if he had expected that answer, but his eyes softened, holding hers with patience. "I'm not asking you to be ready tonight. I'm not even asking you to love me back. All I'm asking is that you let me try. Let me be here not just as your neighbor, but as someone who cares about you more than you realize." Her lips parted, 1,000 protests rising and falling before they could escape. He continued, stepping a little closer, his voice quiet but firm. "You don't have to rush. You don't have to promise me anything. Just let me prove it, one day at a time." Emily felt tears prick the corners of her eyes. No one had spoken to her like that in years. No one had asked for nothing in return. It scared her, but it also warmed something deep inside her she thought had long died. She wanted to believe him. She wanted to lean into the safety of his words. But fear was a stubborn companion. "What if I can't give you what you want?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. Daniel's expression softened even more. He shook his head. "Then I'll still be here, because this isn't about me getting what I want. It's about you not having to go through everything alone anymore." Her heart twisted painfully. She pressed a hand against the counter to steady herself, fighting back the tears threatening to spill. This was too much, too fast, and yet not fast at all, because hadn't she felt his quiet presence all these years? Hadn't she leaned on his small acts of kindness without ever acknowledging them? He wasn't new. He wasn't sudden. He had been there all along. Emily took a shaky breath, trying to hold on to reason. But before she could find her words, something outside caught her attention. A faint voice. Mrs. Collins again. Her tone was hushed, almost conspiratorial, but it carried through the thin evening air and into Emily's open window. "I just hope he tells her the truth soon," she said, clearly to someone else. "She deserves to know before it's too late." Emily's heart skipped a beat. The truth. Her eyes darted back to Daniel, whose face paled instantly. His jaw tightened, and his hands clenched slightly at his sides. He knows exactly what she's talking about. Emily's pulse quickened, confusion and fear tangling inside her. What truth? What is he hiding from me? Daniel, she whispered, her voice sharp with urgency. What is she talking about? He froze. For a long moment he didn't answer. The silence stretched between them, heavier than any words. Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders sagging as if the weight of his secret was too much to carry any longer. His eyes met hers, filled with longing but also with something darker fear, guilt, maybe even shame. Emily, he said softly, his voice rough. There's something I haven't told you. Something I should have told you before tonight. She gripped the counter behind her, her knuckles white. The room suddenly felt too small, too quiet, as though holding its breath for what was coming next. What is it? She asked, her voice breaking. Daniel hesitated, his gaze flicking away for a moment before locking back onto hers. If I tell you, you may never look at me the same way again. Emily's heart pounded so hard she thought it might break through her chest. She didn't know what scared her more, the idea that he was in love with her, or the truth he had yet to reveal. And in that fragile moment, with Lily perfuming the air and the night pressing against her windows, Emily realized her world was hanging by a thread. Whatever Daniel was about to confess would change everything. Emily's fingers tightened around the lily, as if holding them would somehow anchor her to the ground. The petals were soft against her skin, yet the words Mrs. Collins had spoken felt sharp, cutting through the quiet evening like a blade. That man has been walking past my roses for years, rehearsing what he'd say to you. I thought he'd never do it. The statement lingered in the air, impossible to ignore. Emily turned toward Daniel, her lips parting to ask something, anything, but the sight of him silenced her. His shoulders were drawn, his head bowed slightly, as if the very act of being seen had stripped him bare. The man who had always seemed steady, almost unshakable in his quiet kindness, now looked vulnerable. And in that vulnerability, Emily felt something stir inside her, a mix of curiosity, warmth, and fear. She glanced back at Mrs. Collins, who was still standing on her porch with her cardigan drawn around her like a shawl. Her eyes twinkled with that same knowing look, the kind of look older women often wore when they had witnessed more of life than you wanted them to, when they could read hearts better than you could read your own. Emily swallowed hard. Her voice came out softer than she intended. Courage? What do you mean? Mrs. Collins tilted her head, as if she had been waiting for that question. My dear, he's been in love with you far longer than you realize. I've seen it. The way he pauses in front of your house, the way he looks for you when you're out walking. I used to wonder when he'd gather the courage to knock on your door. I suppose tonight is the night. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She almost laughed, almost dismissed it as one of Mrs. Collins's exaggerations, but something in her tone, firm, certain, made it impossible to brush aside. Her gaze shifted back to Daniel. Is that true? The question slipped out, shaky, unsure, but desperate for an answer. Daniel's face reddened deeper, his jaw tightening as if he were weighing how much of himself to reveal. He glanced toward Mrs. Collins, who gave him a small nod, almost encouraging, before finally retreating into her own house, leaving the two of them alone in the heavy silence. The street grew quiet again. A dog barked in the distance. A car rolled past slowly, headlights reflecting off the damp pavement. But all Emily could focus on was the man standing in front of her, the man who had just handed her Lily, the man her neighbor claimed had been in love with her for years. Her heart raced, thudding so loud she was certain he could hear it. Daniel? In love with me? The thought felt strange, almost foreign. Daniel had always been safe territory in her mind. A kind neighbor, a friend, someone who asked how her week was going or offered to help fix a leaky faucet. Someone who asked for nothing in return. She had never let herself imagine more than that. Perhaps because imagining it would have been too dangerous. But now. Daniel cleared his throat, his voice low. Emily, I didn't expect her to say that. Not like this. Her lips trembled, but she managed a whisper. Is it true? He met her gaze then, and for the first time she didn't just see kindness. In his eyes, she saw something deeper, something that had been hiding all along, longing, quiet devotion. Maybe even love. It shook her more than she wanted to admit. Yes, he said simply, his voice steady despite the weight of the word. It's true. The lily in her arms suddenly felt heavier, as though carrying them meant carrying the truth of what he had just confessed. Emily's mind spun. How had she not seen it? Or had she, but chosen to ignore it? Memories flickered. Daniel helping her shovel snow late into the night without complaint. Daniel showing up with soup when she was sick. Daniel watching her with that soft smile when he thought she wasn't looking. How many times had she brushed it off as neighborly kindness, when in reality it had been something more? Her throat tightened. She wanted to speak, to say something that would ease the tension, but all that came out was a breathy, "Why?" Daniel tilted his head slightly. Why what? She hugged the flowers closer to her chest, as if hiding behind them. Why didn't you ever say anything? He let out a small, rueful laugh, though there was no humor in it. Because you've been through enough. I didn't want to be another burden. I thought if I waited long enough, maybe the right moment would come. But the right moment never does it? His words landed heavy, wrapping around her heart. Emily bit her lip, torn between emotions she couldn't untangle. Part of her wanted to run back inside, close the door, and pretend this conversation had never happened. Another part of her wanted to step closer, to lean into the warmth of the truth he had just given her. But she was afraid. Afraid of what it meant. Afraid of what it could cost. Afraid of opening herself to something she might lose again. Daniel. She whispered his name, but nothing more came. He stood there, hands tucked into his jacket pockets now, as if to stop himself from reaching for her. His gaze didn't waver, though it held hers with a quiet intensity that made her stomach twist. The silence stretched on until it became unbearable. And then, as if the universe wanted to keep testing her heart, she heard it again, Mrs. Collins's voice, faint but clear, drifting through her open window. She wasn't talking to them this time. She was speaking to someone else, perhaps on the phone, her tone lower, more serious. I hope he tells her the truth soon, Mrs. Collins murmured, her words carrying through the still night air. She deserves to know before it's too late. Emily froze. Her pulse quickened, confusion knotting inside her chest. The truth? Her eyes darted back to Daniel, searching his face for answers. And that's when she saw it, the flicker of fear in his eyes, the way his jaw tightened, his posture stiffened. He knew exactly what Mrs. Collins meant. And suddenly, the bouquet of lily didn't feel like a simple gesture of affection anymore. It felt like a door opening to something bigger, something heavier, something she wasn't sure she was ready for. Daniel. Her voice was barely audible. What truth? What is she talking about? Daniel didn't answer right away. His lips parted as though he wanted to speak, but the words didn't come. Instead, he looked at her with that same mixture of longing and hesitation, as if he were standing at the edge of a cliff, deciding whether or not to jump. Emily, he finally said. his voice low, almost breaking. "There's something I haven't told you. Something I should have told you long ago." Her chest tightened. The air between them seemed to thicken, heavy with secrets, heavy with the possibility of heartbreak. The lily trembled slightly in her grip as she whispered, "What is it?" Daniel took a slow step forward, his eyes never leaving hers. "If I tell you, everything might change." Emily felt her knees weaken, her breath shallow. Change? What did he mean? What was he holding back? And in that fragile moment, standing in the doorway of her quiet home with Lily pressed against her chest, Emily realized that her life was no longer simple. Whatever Daniel was about to reveal had the power to shift everything she thought she knew about him, about herself, about the quiet life she had been living. Her world, once predictable and lonely, was now trembling on the edge of a secret she wasn't sure she wanted to hear.